Ignat, developer advocate for Kotlin server-side, right?
Yes, correct. I love Spring. You probably don't see it on my notebook, but I actually have a sticker that says Kotlin Heart Spring.
Yeah, yeah. And today we're going to talk about Kotlin Notebooks for Spring developers, which is kind of interesting to hear because that's something new.
Correct. So yeah, hi everyone. My name is Ignat Beresnev. I'm a Kotlin developer advocate at JetBrains, and I'm going to tell you everything that I know about Kotlin Notebooks. And while I still have the attention of all the Java developers after the keynote session, which was all about Java, by the way, and I loved it, I want to make a quick note. Even though I already said Kotlin like 5 times in the first 5 seconds of the presentation, this is for Java developers too, right? So, or any developer that uses IntelliJ IDEA, for that matter. You don't need to have Kotlin in your code base to apply what I'm going to show you today. And the second part of this talk will actually be more about Spring. So this talk is also for Spring developers. So I encourage you to stick around and give Kotlin Notebooks a chance, even if you don't like Kotlin as a language itself. You know, I'm an ex-Java developer, so I know it can be a touchy subject because we may have something unique to offer. And a little hook, maybe to encourage everyone to stay. Do you ever find yourself using evaluate expression to run some code? Not for debugging like you're supposed to use this feature, but since it has access to the code that you have injected, right? Just, you know, using some services, some repositories, getting the data, exploring it. I hope I'm not the only one doing this. And hopefully you can relate. And if you can, then again, stick around until the end and I will show you a better way of doing the same thing with Kotlin Notebooks today. Okay, so this is where the talk actually begins. Kotlin Notebooks have actually been out for a couple of years already, but you might have missed that in 2025.1, IntelliJ IDEA 2025.1, it became a built-in feature, and not only in Ultimate, but in Community Edition too. So you might have noticed the new Kotlin Notebooks file type. But if you're like me, you might be looking at it and thinking, oh, well, yes, I know Jupyter Notebooks. I know this concept from Python. And, you know, there's something for data science. What good is it to me? And that's, I think, the major reason that I slept on them. I saw them there, but I didn't even try them because I didn't know what I could do with them. That is, until someone told me that I could use them with Spring. And that's when they got my attention. So that made me research what Kotlin Notebooks were, what I could do with them. But we have to work our way to Spring and first start with the basics, what Kotlin Notebooks are in general. So when you create a Kotlin notebook file, this is what you're going to see. This thing is called a cell, and based on the name, Kotlin Notebooks, I think it's not difficult to deduce that you can write Kotlin code in there. And the code can be pretty much anything that you want or need, right? You can declare variables, you can declare functions even, you can call these functions in the same cell, you can call other functions from your project, from the libraries that you use, and then when you hit play, the cell gets evaluated, and yeah, basically gets executed. So if you had a println in there, it's going to output something. And it comes with the IDE support that all of you, hopefully enjoy in IntelliJ IDEA. So all of the auto-completions, all of the, pretty much anything that you have in the editor, in average Kotlin or Java files, you would have in Kotlin Notebooks here. If you press the plus icon or the code button here, a new cell will be created in which you can expectedly also write some code, right? And the nice thing is that you can use whatever you evaluated before. So if in the first cell we declared a function or a variable, then we can use that same function or variable in the second cell. Meaning once you run a cell, whatever was in there kind of gets cached, right? So, and not only the result, but everything declared as well. And it does not depend on the order either. So it only depends on the order in which you evaluated the cells. So you can write something in cell number 2, you can hit evaluate, then you can go back to cell number 1, and in cell number 1, you will see the stuff that you declared in cell number 2, right? So this allows you to basically chain, I guess, declarations together. But plain Kotlin is not as useful. You can get a lot of stuff done, but still, most of the time you actually need libraries to do things. And there is a special Gradle-like dependencies block, and note that it is not using Gradle under the hood. I don't want to stress anyone, especially Java developers who are used to Maven. This is not Gradle, but it is Gradle-like, just so that it is a familiar concept and it's easy to remember. So there's a special DSL that you can use to add dependencies. Here, for instance, we can add Jackson. We can execute the cell. We can create a new one, and in the new cell, we can instantiate our object mapper. We can customize it if we want to, and then evaluate that cell as well. This can be useful if, for instance, you want all subsequent cells to use the same object mapper so that it's configured the same way, it has the same options. And then we can basically write some code that uses the object mapper that we declared in cell number 2. And also notice that we don't have to use println here, right? We just return the string, and Kotlin Notebooks, again, they display the last statement that you have in there. In our case, it's a JSON. There's also a drop-down button here that will allow you to use the libraries and classes from your project, right? So not only the direct dependencies, but also all of the dependencies that you have coming from them, all the transitive ones. And so far so good. It's kind of like a REPL, an interactive shell, a Scratch file. But to me, this is actually already more useful than a Scratch file. I love to think about it as more of a collection of Scratch files in the same file, so to say. And that allows you to chain them together and compose great things. But I think the real power of Kotlin Notebooks actually comes from the integrations and kind of hidden features, things that are not immediately obvious or noticeable. That's where I think the biggest advantages come from compared to Scratch files. For example, if you have a large CSV file, you can just drag and drop it into your Kotlin notebook, and it will get evaluated automatically. It will import the built-in library called DataFrame using this special syntax, the use command. Then DataFrame will read the CSV file and display it as a table. And if you use IntelliJ IDEA to work with databases, or if you've used DataGrip for that, then you might be familiar with the table. It's not quite the same, but it looks the same. So you can sort things. And pro tip, by the way, you have the export button here. Again, same export as you have in the database tables, and so you can import the CSV, and then you can you can export it as some other format. And I think this is by far the easiest way that I'm aware of how to convert one type into another without using AI. Because the way that I converted CSVs into insert statements is just multi-lining like 200 lines at the same time. But I can now actually use this. And it doesn't even have to be a CSV file, right? DataFrame supports other formats as well, TSV and others that you might expect, but also files like Excel, as in like the Excel sheets, right? Or you could actually add a JDBC driver here and connect to your database and pull data from there. Either way, once you have the data, you can of course play around with it. For instance, we can get all titles from the US. The dataset is, by the way, a collection of Netflix titles. Right, so we can filter all titles from the US. We can group them by release year and pivot by type, pivot count by type. So we want to get count for each type individually. There happens to be only 2 types, movies and TV shows. So we see the results. This is how many movies and how many TV shows were released each year that we have on Netflix. And I'm not really going to go into the details of what this data set is or which other functions exist. I think you kind of get the point of what you can do with DataFrame. Again, if you're all backend developers, I assume you have to do it as part of your main job anyway, right? So the rest of the API you can hopefully explore yourself and get things done. But more about integrations, another way to visualize data is with Candy. It's a plotting library. You can learn more about it if you go to kotl.in/candy, which reads as Kotlin/candy, or you can import it into your Kotlin notebook using, again, the special command. And honestly, I'm not going to pretend like I know how to use this library beyond like the very basics. but I still want to show you what it can do in case you actually need it, and I'm sure you can figure it out. So I'm gonna show you stuff from the documentation. Candy is essentially a Kotlin DSL for plotting things, right? So it starts with the plot block, and in there, in this particular case, we say that we want a bar chart, where x-axis is going to be the type and y-axis is going to be the count. Again, same Netflix dataset. You can optionally make them pre-tier and add descriptions, and this is what you're going to see, right? So this will be generated as the result of executing the code that I showed you in the cell in Kotlin Notebooks in IntelliJ IDEA. So you will actually see this in IntelliJ IDEA in the output. If you weren't impressed with the bar charts, you can do some advanced plotting like this, or you can do a heat map, or you can even do 2 charts at the same time, whatever they are. And there are many more that are built in. Again, you can go into the docs to find out all about them. Moving on to the next thing. So if you weren't impressed with Candy, we also have Let's Plot, which is again kind of like a plotting library, but it's more advanced. And it is apparently based on the book, The Grammar of Graphics, which just by the name and looking at the cover, I think already tells you that it's something difficult. And yes, it is. So in your notebook, you can again use the use command to add it. And apparently, with Let's Plot, you can build a choropleth. It's the word that I learned when working on this doc. Apparently, a choropleth is this map thing. And if you manage to learn the library and write all of this code, which looks scary, you can actually generate a plot of sunshine hours in different cities, which is also kind of an interesting infographic. And all of these things are not static images, by the way. They're actually interactive. So you will be able to interact with them in the IDE or export it somewhere else, yeah, and have it run like that too. So this is another example built by Let's Plot. I think this one is just a demo that is like car themed. And I feel like I might be losing some of you now, so I'll stop at that. I think we kind of understand now that, yeah, Jupyter Notebooks and Kotlin Notebooks are actually indeed useful for data science. If you have large data sets that you want to explore or plot things, yeah, great. But I guess the main point that I was trying to get across is that all of this is now built into IntelliJ IDEA starting with 2025-1, meaning you can build charts, you know, in IntelliJ IDEA. You don't have to build a custom front end with chart.js, because yeah, again, if you're a backend developer like me, it's gonna take a while. Some of you might say, oh yes, but you know, we have Grafana and all of these other tools that can already do these things. And yes, you're right, but you know, Grafana is there and you need to host it, you need to maintain it, you need to export the data to it somehow. And again, you need to learn how to use Grafana as well. And IntelliJ IDEA is right here at your fingertips. So next time you need to explore a large data set or build a chart to impress your manager, you know, try using Kotlin Notebooks. That they're free and they're right in front of you. And I want to show you one last use case for vanilla Kotlin Notebooks, and after that we will go to Spring. So the use case is exploring REST APIs. So I play World of Warcraft from time to time, and there are actually in-game auction houses that players can use to buy or sell items. And when a player wants to sell an item on the auction house, they have to set the price, and they have to set the price themselves. Nothing is suggested, right? So and it can be any number. And sooner or later, I think someone is bound to mess up and set a lower price than the item should be valued at, either accidentally or maybe because they didn't know what the true value was. And me being a developer, you know, I wanted to write a tool that would take advantage of that would help me get rich, and you know, so that I could analyze the auction house data and find good deals. To my surprise, Blizzard actually provides REST API for querying the auction house, right? So if you want to explore the data, you can use this get function and get the data. But what would the usual steps be for that? Well, you would need to set up a new project, add dependencies, Spring, whatever else. Then you import the data, and then you typically want to save it somewhere because there are rate limits, and if there's a lot to export, you want to save it somewhere, and then you may want to visualize it somehow, even if it is just by looking at the database, but still even setting up the database. So it's like a lot of hassle just for this one tiny tool that you want to write. And it just sounds like a lot of work. But here's what you can do instead. So first, you import, using the special use command, you import ktor client and data frame, which adds a variable with the name HTTP, and you can use it to make requests, right? So we can call the endpoint that I showed you and add some parameters. And after making the request, we can use the special function called deserialize.json. And let's evaluate the request and see what happens when we look at the response variable that we just got. We start seeing all of these different properties, right? So, and if we actually look at a random auction house item, we can see that it has the item property, the ID, the bid, buyout. This looks like something that the API of the auction house would return, right? But if you paid attention, we didn't actually specify the data objects anywhere. But we have them here, right? So what happened was that Kotlin Notebooks, they made the request, they got the response, they looked at the JSON, they analyzed, and they kind of came up with the schema on their own. So, you know, if some properties were present in some items but were missing in others, basically they realized that the property was nullable, and they marked it as such. So we have the schema without having the data objects declared anywhere. They're kind of declared behind the scenes and injected into your Kotlin notebook, which again makes it very easy to explore APIs. We can return the Spring representation of one auction house item, which again just dumps to string, but it's not as convenient to look at, right? Especially if I want to find correlations between multiple items, or I want like to have a list as I have in the game. But we remember that we have data frames, right? And you can turn any list into a data frame. So if we look at the auctions list and use the function called toDataFrame, it generates the table that we saw earlier, right? The same table that you can use to export the data. Again, you can sort things. You can transform the data the way that we also did before. You can plot it, build charts. You know, all of this cool stuff. Yeah, right here. So this one notebook pretty much became like the whole tool that I needed, right? I could run it from time to time. You could even have like a while true loop in there that would rebuild the chart automatically, or maybe, I don't know, send you a notification somehow to tell you that a good deal is there to get. The other cool thing is that we're not actually wasting any requests. If you look at the code, we're actually calling the response variable, and normally if you were doing that, you would be making the request again, right? But since the results of cells are cached, we made the request once, then we got the data, and we have it right here, right? So we can work with the data. Even if it changes, the data, for us, it still stays the same, which can be useful sometimes. And we're not making any requests, so we're not hitting the rate limits. We're not wasting, I think there's like an API limit on how many requests you can make per hour, which is also good. So yeah, going back to the promised Spring integration, right? Finally. The Spring integration is kind of experimental right now, so I know that it's bound to change. There was a talk from like 6 months ago, and I think it's already a bit outdated, at least to a degree. So for up-to-date instructions, you can visit kotl.in/notebook Spring. And I know that one of you will mess it up and either add an S or forget the hyphen, right? So all of these should work. But yeah, in essence, what this will tell you is that you add the Kotlin Jupyter Spring Starter dependency to your project, then you run your project, and then you create a Kotlin notebook, and then you select attach to running kernel, and you start evaluating code. At the moment, there's also an intermediate step. I I think you have to enable a registry flag in IntelliJ IDEA, but hopefully we'll get rid of that soon. What it does is it basically starts the backend inside of your backend, right? And if you're wondering if the Kotlin Notebooks backend has started, you should see a logging message, something like Kotlin starting Kotlin REPL engine. And then the notebook inside IntelliJ IDEA just acts as a front end. So whenever you're trying to evaluate something, it will send the request to the backend within your backend, and it will get evaluated, and then the result will be returned to you. So what this means in practice is that you have access to all of your repositories, all of your services, the whole Spring context, right? So you can all of that is auto-completable. You can have access to anything. You can again call it if you want. You can get beans, and not the ones that you have kind of created by you. I mean, actually the whole Spring context, right? As you can see in the table, we have more than 900 beans available in the context. I could get any of them, call them with any parameter. And for those of you who are over 30, yes, it is like JMX, but I think it's much better. It's much more convenient to use, much more versatile. You don't have to have any additional tools to, again, apart from IntelliJ IDEA, which you hopefully already use. So if you weren't paying attention before, but now you are interested, the instructions are at kotl.in/notebook-spring. And I shared this with a friend. I told him that, yeah, Kotlin Notebooks can connect to your Spring app. And his reaction was this, right? And this, again, might also be your reaction. Because it's a nice technical demo, it's a nice feature, but it isn't immediately obvious what you can do with it. And what I found is that once you know that this is possible, once you know that you can actually do this, at first you forget, but then when you work on some tasks, in the middle of the task you might remember it and think, oh, this is where actually Kotlin Notebooks could be very useful. I wish I could do that now. At least that's what I found myself thinking. So hopefully over the next week or so you will hopefully think of use cases on your own, specific to your project. But I don't want to wait a week, right? We want to figure out what we can do with them today. So I want to focus on the use cases and stories of how I either used or, where I wish I had Kotlin Notebooks available at the time, to hopefully inspire you and give you some ideas on what it is that you can do with them. Right. So instead of me trying to impress you with a bunch of other technical demos. So what good can you do with Kotlin Notebooks in a Spring codebase? The first story will be about Caleb's.io. It's a website that I was working on. It's a Kotlin multi-platform library index where each library has a separate page. And the problem was that the libraries typically don't have any short and informative descriptions, right? Because the description that you have that is published to Maven Central, they're either copy-pasted from one artifact to another, or they're entirely missing, not null, but an empty string. Maven Central actually lets you pass, or they're just 3 words. Whereas I wanted the description to be indexable. I wanted it to have keywords. So something that's like, I don't know, like 20, 30 words, maybe a couple of sentences. And I couldn't get it from anywhere. It literally doesn't exist anywhere. But the libraries actually have very nice readmes, right? Library authors put a lot of effort into it. So, and I imported for each library, I imported the readme from GitHub. And what I wanted to do was basically feed the readme to ChatGPT and ask it to generate the description for me. So yeah, that's the result. I actually did it. The feature was implemented, and at the time I didn't have Kotlin Notebooks, but if I did, here's what I would do. Right. So in my code, I have I did a simple AI service that basically has the one function that's like ask AI. It accepts the system and the user messages and the temperature we will cover a bit later. And the implementation is using like a 1-year-old version of Spring AI, which I highly recommend. The code might be outdated because I know that Spring AI has just had their first 1.0 release, GA release. So congrats to the team. I really love the project. Do give it a try, especially with Kotlin Notebooks. So all I needed, I have the service already, right? So all I needed was the prompt to generate the short description based on the README. And if I had Kotlin Notebooks, then I would just connect from them to my Spring app. I would, use the AI service, basically like a web version of ChatGPT. I would ask it questions. I would have my prompt in here. I would inject stuff into it. Things would be very easy, right? However, I didn't have Kotlin Notebooks back then. So at first, I actually used the web version of ChatGPT, right? I tried to refine my prompt using it. And I encountered the first problem of where's the temperature parameter, right? You remember the temperature parameter that I had in my service? Well, it's hidden away from you if you're using the front end. And the temperature parameter is important because it is basically like it sets the degree to which ChatGPT hallucinates and gives reproducible answers. With a low temperature, if you ask who the mascot of Kotlin is, it will always say Kotlin koala. So 9 out of 10 times it will be something related to a koala, right? Reproducible, it's incorrect, but it's at least consistent. With a higher temperature of 1, the answer will be always different, and it will always be something cat-like. For example, I think the most creative one was Cody McCotface. Oh, yeah, Cody McCotface. Or I think it generated something about a fox as well. Both are incorrect, again, right? If you didn't know, the mascot of Kotlin is Cody, and I don't know what it is, but our marketing department is very clear. It is not a cat. But at least you can kind of see the difference between the different temperatures when talking to ChatGPT. Right, so I needed the temperature. And the second problem that I encountered with the web version is that the prompt actually needed data from my backend, which wasn't easy to get. So I needed to write a prompt that would use the README of the project and some additional data as well. And I tried to copy paste it from the database into the web version, but that got annoying very quickly, right? Because you refine the prompt on one project and you think that it works well, and then you try some other project and you find some corner case that wasn't covered, or maybe because again the results are different every time you run them, they're not consistent. It might not reproduce with some, but reproduce with others. So a lot of corner cases to cover, which means a lot of testing, right? And copy pasting stuff manually from the database, yeah, tedious. So what did I do? I created a debug controller with the debug parameters for the prompt and the project path, and it basically just called my AI service, right? And I didn't find anything easier than calling it from Swagger UI, because again, I cannot do front ends. And it worked kind of, but again, it wasn't as flexible, wasn't as convenient to use as it could have been. Because again, with Kotlin Notebooks, you have access to the backend. You can just call the AI service. You have the data from the backend, so I can load the README. I can add the README as the user prompt. I can set my prompt in the system prompt. I can try it with different temperatures. You see the result immediately. Everything works great, super easy. I wish I had Kotlin Notebooks back then. Some of you may argue that it could have been a unit test or an integration test, and perhaps you will be right. However, it is not the case for the next story, which is about Everland. So there's a game called Everland. It's a social MMO, and it was never finished. It was abandoned about 5 years ago. So the client of the game is still available, right? You can download it on Steam. It's there. However, because it's an MMO, so it's an online game, it had the game server, right? And the game server was, of course, closed source. It was never published, so there's no access to it. And if you run the game client and you type something in the account name and account password, it will try to connect to the original game server, and of course the request will fail because the game server is no longer available, right? It was taken down 5 years ago. However, what if I implemented my own private server? Basically a Spring Boot application, Spring Boot backend, and then I would hack the game client to redirect all of the requests that it was sending to the original game server to my private server. So I would get all of the requests that the client sends. And then it's just a matter of figuring out what to respond with, right? Because the client sends some data and it expects some data in return, basically exchanging DTOs, right? Which is essentially just reverse engineering the protocol and the messages, and yeah, the game will work. I'll cut long story short. It took a lot of experimentation and trial and error, but I actually implemented the server almost in full. And the biggest problem was the following. I'm going to show you my typical workflow of before Kotlin Notebooks. Because I needed to experiment a lot. So let's pretend I changed some code. I have the game on the right. Then I restart my backend because I changed something. And then the game kind of goes into loses the connection, right? And it hangs for about 40 seconds until it goes into this inconsistent, invalid state and nothing works. So you have to actually close the game. You have to start it again. You have to type in your account name, the password. You have to wait for it to do all the checks. And only then you can actually see the results of what it is that you changed in the backend. And given that I didn't have any documentation, I didn't know anything about how the original server worked, it took a lot of trial and error. With Kotlin Notebooks, however, I could connect to the backend, right? And I could send stuff from it. So the protocol of this game was basically exchanging protobuf messages over WebSockets. And I knew the DTOs that the client was sending to me, and I knew the DTOs that the client was waiting from the server, was listening to receive from the server, right? So it was basically a matter of sending different requests, sending different events to the client and seeing how the client reacts, and then maybe playing around with the parameters. So let's see what happens when I send the player dense updated event. I'm connected to the backend. This one is, I think, kind of obvious, but still, we set dance index to 7, and we see that our character starts dancing. So it was literally as easy as that. Before Kotlin Notebooks, I would have to add, again, either like a debug endpoint, or I would have to add some sort of a utility function that would trigger if I wrote something in the chat, and then it would send the event. Yeah, it was very, very tedious. But here I can try things, right? And one example that is a bit more difficult than that is a lot of things on the client are initialized by the server, which I didn't actually expect. In particular, the most painful area was the doors, right? So you have the interior buildings that you go into, and you go into the interior buildings through the doors, and the doors were returned by the server. And of course, I didn't know the locations of the doors because I didn't have access to the code of the original server. So I had to literally guess where the doors should be and which types of doors, which again, a lot of trial and error, right? And the way that you spawn doors is you need to send an entity joined event that is wrapped in the wrapped entity state of type door, which has the direction facing south and the specific coordinates. And then you have a magic number, data ID, which not even in enum, right? And all of these are protobuf messages that the client expects. So it took me a while to figure this stuff out. And we can see what actually happens when we try to execute this with data ID that we have. First we will spawn the door, you can see it on the right. Then I change the data ID to the second, it spawns a piglet, right? And then I change the data ID to something else, and it spawns a whole entire interior, like the interior of a room, even though the door entity type is still set to door, right? So you can see that this one message can actually instantiate 3 types of things, which again, took a while to figure out. But if I had that, I could experiment very, very, very easily, right? So my life would have been much easier. In that sense, that use case was more like kind of like hot reload, but you weren't actually reloading anything. It was more so that you could try to experiment and try things online without losing the WebSocket connection. And you see it all over the place, not even with the games, but just typical backend services. So this, unfortunately, also couldn't be a unit test or an integration test because I needed to see what was happening on the client, which is also, again, the case not only with the games, but if you're a backend dev, you sometimes need to debug things and work with the client locally, so that might help you. And debug controllers were just not basically flexible enough to save much time. But imagine if you could hot swap entire services with new implementations, and maybe you can. I haven't tried it, but there is a hot swappable target source that acts kind of as a proxy. You can look into it. I think you can use this to hot swap services and repositories in any bean that you want from your Kotlin notebook, right? But there are also other use cases. For instance, you could use Kotlin notebooks in testing, right? You could replace in-house tools like maybe your admin control panels, right? You can use Kotlin notebooks to maybe add currency, or if I don't know, the designers added some new items and you want to try them in the game, you could also use Kotlin notebooks for that to kind of give you an initial loadout. And some of these things could potentially be just like SQL requests. Like adding currency might be as easy as incrementing some number somewhere, but if you're changing stuff in the database, it's still stuff in the database, right? If you have caching on the backend, then the caches might not pick up what you changed in the database. But even if you don't have any caching, if you change something in the database, there's no guarantee that the client will see it, right? Because the client actually needs to pull data from the backend somehow, which in my case, I needed to send an event back to the client, but maybe, I needed to notify it that it needed to fetch it somehow. Either way, like when you have access to the actual backend, I think it's much easier and more bulletproof. Some scenarios that you can describe in Kotlin notebooks, write the code for them, could be somewhere between end-to-end and integration tests. So on one hand, you have the real app that is running. Nothing is faked, nothing is mocked. You have access to the data that you might pull like from your production, or maybe if you have like a pre-prod instance, because again, you can also deploy these to your test or test environments, not only locally. So you have the real data on one hand, but on the other, you still have access to the services and repositories and all of the internals, not just the controllers, right? So from that perspective, it's not quite an end-to-end test, but it is close to it. And it's not quite an integration test, but it is also close to it. It's somewhere right in between. And maybe you could have these scenarios as part of your, pre-deployment checks or pre-release checks that you run like once every 2 weeks. You could also use Kotlin notebooks to help QA reproduce problems, right? Some bugs, they require the backend to be put in some specific state that might be difficult to reach just by pressing buttons on the front end. You could use Kotlin notebooks to maybe set some, like some atomic Boolean flag in your code base, or do something that makes it trigger the scenario that QA need. The other examples are about working with the data, right? So initiating external messages. For instance, if you're waiting for Kafka messages to come to your backend to start doing something, and the Kafka message is supposed to come from another backend, from another service, with Kotlin notebooks, you can basically pretend to be that service, and instead of receiving the Kafka message, you can construct it in the Kotlin notebook and pass it to the handler, the message handler, and kick things off from there. Likewise, you can initiate internal messages, right? So if your service needs to send a message somewhere, and it's just difficult to trigger, you can, again, from your Kotlin notebook, you can, send some messages to the Kafka topics. Yeah, very, very easy. And you might argue that you can send messages to Kafka topics from other tools, which might be the case if you're sending JSONs that are not difficult to construct by hand, human readable. But if you're, for instance, sending protobuf messages or some other binary representation, it is much easier to construct the DTO, like the object itself, in Kotlin code and send that, right, without having to worry about serialization. You could also peek at messages, right? Kind of be the man in the middle. Maybe read from one topic, so subscribe to one topic from your Kotlin notebook, get messages from there and redirect them to another topic, right, and save them somewhere. You could also use this to maybe replicate some data or enrich it. So you get a message, then you add some additional fields to it, and only then you pass it to the repositories. Or yeah, again, you connect to one backend and to the database of another backend, and you pull data from one into another. I also know that some of the database schemas that many backend developers have, it's very easy to get lost in them. There's like foreign links upon foreign links, and everything is an ID. And to find the line that you need to change, you have to go through like 5 tables, just following the IDs, right? Whereas working with entities is actually much easier, right? Because the entity kind of already handles all of the links for you, and it pulls them all in one place. So from your Kotlin notebooks, you can work with entities that you understand as a human, instead of going into the database and figuring out how things are stored. And on the same topic is, like some data is optimized for storage, not necessarily for being able to read it. For example, if you're storing JSONs in a database or something in binary, looking at the data in DataGrip or IntelliJ IDEA, you won't understand much. Whereas maybe if you connect to it with your Kotlin notebooks, then you will. There are also markdown cells, right? So like a much smaller use case, but you can maybe write documentation from your Kotlin notebooks. You can share them with your colleagues, right? So all of the Kotlin notebooks are files, which means you can commit them. There's also a share button in each notebook, and because the format of Jupyter Notebooks is supported by many tools, if you upload your Kotlin notebooks to, let's say, GitHub, they're actually rendered like natively, like Jupyter Notebooks. And not only do they render the markdown code, the markdown text, but they also render the code and the results that you got. So it can be used maybe to showcase how to use your library, or to reproduce some scenarios, some bugs, and share them with your colleagues. You can also take advantage of caching, which is a use case that wasn't obvious to me until somebody pointed it out. Remember that each cell kind of caches the result, right? The declarations and the result. So what you can do, again, while connected to your backend, you can load some data in cell number 1. Then you can, in cell number 2, you can trigger something that would mutate that data. Let's say you start the cron job or something that does maintenance, right? It changes the data, and then in the same cell, you pull that data again. And what you end up with is, in cell number 1, you have the previous state of some data, and in cell number 2, you have the new state, right? And you can compare them in cell number 3, because you still have access to both, which again can hopefully simplify debugging, because before that, you would have to dump either the toString representation to a text file and then compare them using IntelliJ's diffs, or do something along those lines, but not here. And this is just like an interesting use case of using the features of Kotlin notebooks to your advantage. You could visualize meter registry, right? So all of those charts that I showed you, you have access to the metrics of the application. If you need some, very quick graphs, you could do them from Kotlin notebooks. So there are many creative ways of using Kotlin notebooks. Hopefully you now already have some use cases that you maybe can apply to your production code base. I wouldn't advise running it in production, but yeah, to your actual code base at work, yeah, sure, why not? So yeah, just knowing that it's possible will hopefully open the many exciting doors for you, right? So let it grow on you. The nice thing about this is that it is also 100% Java compatible, which means that if you have, and this is a pro tip for my fellow Kotlin developers, if you have an agnostic colleague that is a Java developer and they're agnostic about Kotlin, what you can do is you can write Kotlin notebooks, and they're in Kotlin, and you can do things with them that are not possible to do without Kotlin notebooks, right? And you can share it with the colleague, and the colleague will be impressed and he will want to use it as well, which means that he will have to use Kotlin. So it's basically like one foot in the door, and once he starts using Kotlin, even in Kotlin notebooks, I think it will also grow on him over time, and maybe the next step would be adding Kotlin to your production code base. So it's kind of like a way of using Kotlin at work, even if you're not allowed to use Kotlin at work because it is just a tool in this sense, right? So you're using IntelliJ IDEA. You're not really kind of using Kotlin, right? It just happens to be in Kotlin. And yeah, just to prove my point, the example that I showed you in the beginning, that code base was 100% Java, right? So there was zero Kotlin in it, not even the build script file, so because it uses Maven. Yet it still works perfectly well with Kotlin Notebooks. So yeah, just one foot in the door. You could also impress your manager with the charts. I'm sure they'll like it. However, if all of that sounds too good to be true, perhaps maybe it is a little bit. And I don't mean Kotlin Notebooks themselves, but I mean the Spring integration in particular, at least right this second in 2025, because it is more of a proof of concept at the moment, right? The Spring integration. And I wouldn't be a developer advocate if I didn't try to sell you a POC as like a production solution, right? So you perhaps maybe lower your expectations a little bit, because I know I don't want you to start trying it and then start hitting all of these different problems. The problems are there, but we will polish them. And if you have any feedback, please leave it at kotl.in/notebook spring feedback. There's a U-track issue for that. Any thoughts that you have, please dump them there. Your use cases of what you wish you could do, of what you tried but it didn't work, that's in addition to submitting individual bug requests, of course. Because yeah, it is rough around the edges, especially with cases that we didn't think of. For instance, JPA and how it should work with entities and caching and transactions. But yeah, I'm sure if you start trying it, you will see. But just don't get your hopes up too much, but also don't get discouraged. Give it time. It is a new feature. The integration is basically just released. Yeah, thank you for your attention. Again, the link to try Kotlin Notebooks for Spring. Thank you.
Thank you, Ignat. That was amazing, I believe. So, do I get it right that the Notebook Spring feedback link should lead to the U-track issue?
Yes.
I'm posting this link to the chat in our under our YouTube stream, and actually, there was a lot of discussions in the chat about using Kotlin when JetBrains gets a free AI tier. And actually, this is something I would like to comment by myself, because answering the question of a viewer called MS, we do have a free tier for AI Assistant in IntelliJ currently. So just Google it with the words AI Assistant JetBrains free, and you will see how to start using it. That's it. That's done. So the second question I've seen, which I guess would be logical to ask, is do you have a Git repo with the code you've been showing? Because I do believe that if we share it, the Everland client downloads and Steam usage in SteamDB will just skyrocket after this talk.
Unfortunately, not the examples that I was showing, because again the backends are private. Because I know as soon as I publish my backends to GitHub, I know some of you will find not even the embarrassing code that I don't care about, but I know that I have bugs in there and I don't want to get hacked, right? But if you go to the repository of Kotlin Jupyter on GitHub, or if you follow any of the links that I showed you before, like kotl.in/candy or /let's plot, then you will see the examples there. Again, same example. There are actually a number of data sets, and it's like huge notebooks to showcase the features, all rendered by GitHub, so you don't even have to import it into your IDE, but there are definitely examples out there.
Okay, thanks. So the next question was the first one asked, and thank you for asking questions in the chat. Keep doing that, and keep pushing the like button, because I still see the number of viewers is far more larger than the likes. Basically, the first question was, how does Kotlin Notebook connect to Spring? Is it JMX? Because I've seen there was a slide, it is like JMX, but...
No, so what happens is when you add the Jupyter starter, it essentially starts I think it uses even like 5 ports. It starts the part of Kotlin Notebooks inside of your app, right? And then what you do from IntelliJ IDEA is that you connect to the kind of the backend of Kotlin Notebooks that was started within your app, and IntelliJ IDEA acts as a front end, and all of the requests to evaluate code, they get sent to your app. They're kind of I think a part of them is executed within your app, and then the results are returned back to IntelliJ IDEA to display to you.
Well, I mean, it's just kind of a special protocol, and that's
Yeah,
it.
pretty much. It's not. I don't think it's using JMX. I don't think it's using anything. Well, I mean, it's obviously using sockets and kind of like that standard, but
Okay.
not anything like high level.
Yeah, cool. Do Kotlin Notebooks support Apache Parquet files also?
I have no
I
idea.
actually had to Google it, and this is some kind of CSV type,
Okay.
CSV-like files. So the answer is we currently don't know. Feel free to reach out to our support team or anyone, or like keep asking. We will try to find it out during the day and answer in the chat. So stay tuned with us. The next one is, well, that's kind of a long question, so I will be reading it pretty slow. So how IntelliJ IDEA Ultimate is being deployed with atomic Kotlin script function connected with GCP Cloud Shell with parallel null object finder through one AI ML file type in operational system. It feels like a troll question.
Yeah, I don't think it's related to Kotlin Notebooks, honestly. I got like a half of it, but yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, I also just don't get to the very like meaning of the question. So if you want us to answer it, stay in the chat. Try to maybe like put it in an easier way. So because we are here live, and we go to the next one. Like, do Kotlin Notebooks support Spring Web Flux?
So Kotlin itself, if you look at the integration of Kotlin inside Spring, then you can actually write your controllers as suspendable functions, right? So all of the request methods you can write as suspendable functions, and that will automatically be kind of bridged with Webflux. So if that integration works, then I would expect Kotlin Notebooks to work the same way, to have the same type of integration. But even if it is not there, I think it should be added. It shouldn't be that difficult, because again, I think the groundwork for it has been laid in Spring itself. But we may need to adjust it a little bit. But I think it should work. But yeah, that's one of the use cases that I actually haven't thought about, and I don't think anyone has tried yet. So you can be the first and give us the feedback on how it went. It might work.
Yeah, thanks. Great. I actually wanted to share the news that Parquet support in DataFrame is on its way. So we have an open pull request, as far as I see, which tries to add Parquet support via Apache Arrow integration. So this is the technical question now. So stay tuned and don't wait for it. The next question is, and I do believe that we can start answering in a speculative way here. Will Java get a notebook like that?
Okay, yeah, that's a difficult one, because I actually wanted to cover it in the talk, but I didn't for some reason. Why Kotlin Notebooks? Well, aside from the fact that we actually have a team at JetBrains that does Kotlin Notebooks, but I think another part that helps is that to have Kotlin Notebooks, you need some stuff. You need some holes in the compiler APIs, and you need some holes in tooling to make it all work. Because again, Kotlin Notebooks are based on the same tech that Scratch files use, right? Which is basically like the REPL, right? Kotlin REPL. So yeah, that I'm not sure if Java has quite the same holes as we did for Kotlin to be able to do that. But if it does, then it might be more difficult to add, because again, Java being a very community-oriented language, might take a while. But with Kotlin, we can just do things. We can try. We can experiment. The Spring integration wasn't even planned, as far as I'm aware. It was born somehow, and we'll see what it turns into. If we should continue investing into it. So if I had to speculate, I would probably say that maybe not in the near future, but maybe at some point. Maybe someone else can be inspired by this and pick it up. Why not? Yeah.
So the basic answer is because we at JetBrains do believe that Kotlin is great for ad hoc developer tasks. Like it has a lot of tooling built in the language itself, so it helps you to get more productive with ad hoc tasks. And Kotlin notebooks are built for ad hoc tasks for developers and data scientists, I guess. So coming back to that, I've seen one more question, and we have a couple of minutes too. So if I am a Java developer, how do I jump into Kotlin development?
It's actually much easier than you would expect. I think the easiest way to jump into it is just like kind of like throwing the baby in the pool. Just start writing Kotlin code, right? It's not as difficult as it may seem, because if you're switching to another language, most of the time it means also switching the ecosystems, right? Everything around the language, not only the language itself, but everything around it. The dependency management, all of the concepts, the problems, the IDE, tooling. Whereas with Kotlin, it's everything around Kotlin is literally the same as with Java, right? You get the same IDE, you know how to use. You get the same build tools, Maven, Gradle, whatever else. You can even use Java core from Kotlin, right? So all of the collections, queues, concurrency. You don't have to use coroutines. You can just use JMM, same guarantees, same everything, and you can have it alongside your Java classes too, right? So it's only the language that you have to only basically the syntax and maybe some constructs that you have to learn. And the best way to do that is just to maybe you go to kotlinlang.org, you do a couple of tutorials, maybe Kotlin cons. But then what I would recommend is starting out with unit tests, right? So you don't have to add Kotlin to your production code base right away. You can add it to your tests, maybe the unit tests of one module, and then nobody really cares about the tests, so you might not even get any pushback from your colleagues, right? You can even introduce it as like, hey guys, I found this new testing framework. Can I please try it? And tests can be fun to run with Kotlin too. If you look at projects like CodeTest, which are basically very DSL oriented, not everybody likes them, these features, but they showcase at least the language design that Kotlin can offer, right? So yeah, that would be my advice. Add them to as unit tests and just start writing Kotlin code. Yeah.
So now we are second foot in the door, right?
Yeah. After that, it's like your colleagues will. If your colleagues can ignore Kotlin notebooks, I don't think they can ignore unit tests. Sooner or later, they will have to change something in there. And again, it's difficult to explain about Kotlin. There's no one big selling feature, right? It's a bunch of small, features or nice things about it that kind of make up the whole picture. And then once you have that whole picture, basically, once you have the second or third, third foot in the door is, yeah.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah.
Well, that's a teamwork. That's what we call a teamwork, right?
Yes.
So there is a question about the upcoming features and future development of Kotlin notebooks and the roadmap. So do you have anything to share, or we should just ask our product manager, who is currently monitoring the comments, answer that?
Should probably ask him, but at the same time, I think we want to, look at the feedback, because again, there are so many use cases with Spring specifically, so many different code bases, so many different integrations that for us, especially the Kotlin Notebooks team not having to use Spring all the time, they might not know about all of the corner cases and ins and outs. So some work is still planned based on the feedback that we already have, based on feedback from developer advocates and internally, but still it would be great to hear if there are any major problems, something that's showstopper, critical issues, and then we would of course prioritize that.
Yeah, and now we have 10 seconds. Everybody is heartbroken because you said nobody cares about tests, and you stay tuned with us for the next session with Marit.